Hey, I don't know about you, but I can feel so scattered sometimes between the pinball machine of thoughts bouncing around my mind, not to mention all the notifications, my very loud children, and the ongoing demands coming at me all day, every day. The days can feel overwhelming. That's exactly why I created my brand new Start Your Day Planner. This planner helps you start each day clear, confident, and in control. This simple 5-minute morning routine gives you easy prompts that give context, clarity, and focus to your day so you know exactly what to focus on and you finally feel good about how you spend your time. And I'm so excited to let you know that the physical hard copy of the Start Your Day Planner is now available. You can head over to startyourdayplanner.com to get your copy. And if you want to check it out before you buy it, you can even download a free digital sample of the Start Your Day Planner. You can see the inside. Go ahead, get started on the system and try it out for yourself. Head over to startyourdayplanner.com and get ready to start your days in a whole new way. That's startyourdayplanner.com. Hey everyone, and welcome to Get Your Hopes Up. I'm Christy Wright, and I'm so glad you're here. Romans 15:13 says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by power of the Holy Spirit." Our God is the God of hope, and he wants you to overflow with hope. So let's start our week by getting our hopes up again. Now, I'm so excited about today's episode because we have a guest that I have become a new friend of, new fan of, and I have learned so much from. Craig Cooney. Now, today we're going to be talking to Craig about prophecy, about transition, and hearing from God. And y'all, this episode is so good, in fact, that I'm going to break it into two parts. But before we dive in, let me tell you a little bit about Craig. Craig Cooney is the lead pastor of Hope Church in Northern Ireland. He's married to Becky, and they have a 12-year-old son, Elijah, as well as an excitable Labradoodle named Henry. Craig started his online ministry, Daily Prophetic, in 2018, seeking to bring prophetic encouragement and biblical wisdom to God's people. Since then, his Instagram page has grown to over 115,000 followers. He's the author of 6 books: The Tension of Transition, Spirit Speak, I Hear Yahweh, When the Lamb Roars, The Blueprint, and my personal favorite, The Threshold. Craig has also mentored hundreds of people online on how to hear God's voice for themselves and apply God's wisdom as they navigate through the transitions of life. Y'all, this conversation was so amazing, and I know you're going to gain so much from not only Craig, but learning from this conversation on how to hear God's voice for yourself. Check out part 1 of my conversation with Craig Cooney. Craig, thanks so much for being here.
So good to be with you, Christy. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so we were just chatting even before we started recording, and I've got to tell you, I have literally 2 pages of notes over here of questions to ask you because I have genuinely, I just want my audience to hear this. I have been such a student of yours, whether you know it or not, from the writings that you share, the excerpts you share on Instagram, which I could even dig into of just how brilliant that is and how that helped me know who you are. And even the Lord would speak to me through those little clips or reels or stories. But then that led me to download your digital version of your devotional Threshold, which spoke to me so perfectly and prophetically. And now I've just learned so much from you. So I'm really excited to dive in today because I want my audience to get to learn from you like I do. But in case they are new to you, would you start by just telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do and where you are and all the things?
Sure. Christy, thank you again. It's such an honor to be with you. As people can probably tell, I'm not American.
You're
I'm
not
from the deep south. I'm not from Tennessee, y'all. I am from Northern Ireland. I'm from a little place just outside Belfast in Northern Ireland. I am married to Becky. We've been married 15 years next week. We have a boy called Elijah who's 12 and a Labradoodle called Henry who is 3. I am a pastor of a church. I've been leading churches in Ireland here for 20 years now. And I also, as Christy says, I write, I do Instagram, a page called Daily Prophetic, which I've been doing for about 6-7 years now. I've written, I think, 6 or 7 books in that time. And I really major on 2 areas: prophetic, how to hear God's voice, and transition, navigating those difficult, tricky contours of life where we're not completely sure what the next best step is. And so they're the two areas I really focus on. And the two obviously perfectly weave together, because at those transitional moments of life, at those turning points, at those pivotal moments, when we're not sure what to do, we need God's direction. We need to discern his will. And I always talk, when I'm talking about the prophetic, I talk about the prophetic advantage, because I believe that hearing God's voice gives you an advantage in life. And it's not mystical, and it's not woo-woo, and it's not for weirdos who handle snakes. And it is for every believer. And so I'm looking forward to getting into this today, because one of my goals, Christy, is to demystify the prophetic. I think there's so much baggage attached to the prophetic, and people think only certain special, anointed, ordained, whatever it is, people can hear God's voice. But I'm looking forward to helping your listeners understand that all of them not only can, but it is their birthright as children of God to hear their Father's voice.
Oh, it's so good. And my audience knows I love to talk about this. Like we were just saying, I love to help them discern God's voice, because is something I've not only learned more about in the last 5, 10 years, I've definitely grown in my discernment in it and the ways that he speaks to me. But this is one of the top questions that I'm asked from people, like, well, how did you know that it was God, and how did you discern it, and how can you trust it? And so we're gonna get into all that, because I want them to hear from someone else other than me and hear a different perspective on this. But I want to start with just you mentioned Daily Prophetic, which is your Instagram account. And the reason I want to start there is not only because that's how I found you, someone shared a post or something, that's how I was introduced to you, but the word prophetic or prophecy, that word, especially to people that are maybe, I don't know, they're not as comfortable with it. They haven't been taught this. Even myself, this is very, very new to me to get comfortable. I know that word is biblical, but it's only in the last 2 years that I've started to use it in my vocabulary and even see that as a gifting that I have. How did you have the boldness to start an Instagram account that says Daily Prophetic? Like, that takes some nerve, Craig. Like, let's just take me back to when you started this account.
Can I let you in on a secret?
Yes,
I
please.
never intended to start a thing called Daily Prophetic so much. I was just trying to learn Instagram. Honestly. So my background was in marketing. It was in PR. That was what my first college degree was in. And 2018 rolls around, and I'm only on Facebook, and all the kids are talking about Insta. And I'm like, I've got to learn Insta. And so I set up this account called Daily Prophetic just to learn Instagram. And this is complete. This is May 2018. So this is not like this is 6 years ago. And so I simply thought, you know what, I'm going to ask God, what does he want to say to his children? And I'm going to write it down, and that's all I'm going to do. And I thought, I blocked everyone who knew me from it following me, because I was so because of the baggage that you're talking about and all of the weirdness around the prophetic. And I just thought, I blocked everybody that I knew, and I thought, I'll post this and 20 people will read it, and that will be the end of it. And within a week, 1,000 people were following me, 2,000, and it began to grow at like 1,000 people a week. In terms of the prophetic element, I get that. When we think of prophets, we think of, the guys like Samuel in the Old Testament, or Elijah, and we have this kind of picture of people who hear this booming voice from God. And he instructs them, or he gives them insight about the future, like fortune telling almost, or future. And that's this connotation that we have of the prophetic, when the reality of it is this. I have a 12-year-old son. From the moment he entered the world, I spoke to him. Why? Because he's my child. Could he understand me? No, not at first. He couldn't understand a word. Did it stop me speaking to him? No. But over time, he learned to recognize my voice. He learned to understand what I was saying. And I talk to him in a different way than I talk to anyone else. He has a way of relating to me, and I have a way of relating to him. And the prophetic is simply that. It is hearing your Father's voice. I had this epiphany a while ago, Christy, that Adam and Eve never struggled to hear God's voice. It was never weird. It was as natural to them as talking to each other. to understand the Father. It says God spoke to them in the garden. God said, and we read that, but we don't think about it. And I know the fall changed that, and I know the fall when Adam and Eve sinned created distance. But here's the reality: God never stopped speaking the whole way through the Bible, through prophets, through signs and wonders, through nature, even through a donkey at one stage. And so God is. I say this sort of with tongue in cheek. Our God is incredibly chatty. He loves to talk.
I love
The
that.
Bible says in Psalm 139 that the thoughts he has about you outnumber the grains of sand. Now think about that. I love the beach. Imagine picking up a handful of sand, golf course bunkers, beach, whatever it is, deserts. The thoughts that God has about you outnumber the grains of sand. In other words, you're always on his mind. And so the prophetic demystified is simply you picking one of those grains of sand, as connecting with the thoughts of God for yourself, for other people, for other situations, and for you, it's believing them and living them. For others, it's sharing what God is saying, and it's not primarily about foretelling the future. It is about God giving you clarity, most often on the reality that you're facing right now. It is sometimes, of course, you get insights into the future, but most of the time, it is God just saying, this is what's going on. This is my perception of it. This is this is the step you need to take this. And it is so much more simple. Jesus said in John 10, my sheep hear my voice. That is the qualification for hearing God's voice. Be a sheep. Simply just be one of his sheep and and listen. I think that's a big part of the problem is we're just so busy and we have so much noise and we walk around with AirPods in and we're always in just Netflix and we've just got this. And sometimes I think God is speaking so much more, but there's so much static and so much noise that that's why I think he sometimes, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, I think he has to resort to prophetic dreams at times because it's the only time when we're quiet enough to hear him. And so our God loves to communicate. When you think about creation, how did he create? God said, let there be. God said, let there be. God said, let there be. He creates Adam and Eve. We are made in his image and likeness. We're communicative. He communicates with them. The entire Bible is the story of God wooing his children back home. The entire Bible is the story of a father wanting his kids to come home. And so to do that, he communicates in many different ways. And so the prophetic is not weird. It's not woo-woo. It's not new agey. It's not out there. It is simply a loving creator speaking to his creation. And that happens in different ways, and we'll get into that. But I think we just need to understand that this is it's the birthright of every child of God.
Oh, it's so good. Okay. So let's talk about these words and why we feel so weird about them. Because if you were to ask me, um, 3 years ago, Craig, if you were to ask me, Christy, are you a prophet? Do you have the gift of prophecy? Do you have the prophetic gifting? Anything like that, I'd say, no, 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 like, no, 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 like that word, that word. But if you would say to me, Christy, do you hear from God? I'd be like, oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I hear from him all the time. So why do we feel weird about this word? Why, like, even when I say this word, whenever I introduce you and I say, hey, today we're talking about prophecy, instantly people are like, "Ugh," right? Like it feels so intimidating. It feels like it was something ancient and biblical and back then and for them and not today, present, current, and relevant and for us. So why do we feel so weird about it?
I think for two reasons. One is there's one camp of the church that believes that's only for back then, 2,000
Right.
years
Oh,
ago.
I've heard that
And
explicitly
yeah,
told to me. You cannot hear that because God does not speak like that.
and so when the scriptures were finished, prophecy ceased. That's the end of it. God decided 2,000 years ago he wasn't going to speak anymore. His book, he finished his book. And if you've written a book, when you finish a book, you don't want to speak to anybody for a while. But God finished the Bible. He wrapped it up in the first
He had
century,
nothing else to say.
and he had nothing else to say, and that was that. So that's one camp. The other camp, I think the other thing that puts people off is there's so many weird people who call themselves prophets. Let's just be honest.
Let's talk about that.
And I struggle with that. I don't call myself a prophet.
Yes.
People sometimes will address me that way. I don't correct everybody, but I don't believe I'm somebody who hears God's voice.
Can I ask you why though? Like you haven't, no, I really want to know because I've struggled with this. You have an account called Daily Prophetic. You say prophecy is our birthright, but you don't call yourself a prophet. So what's the difference between the gift of prophecy and being a prophet?
I think a prophet is someone who operates at a much higher level. No, I have other prophets around the world who will tell me I'm a prophet. So, but I just honestly, I get concerned when people go on social media and start calling themselves apostles and prophets. I think it's something that you don't call yourself. I think it's something that, first of all, God calls you it, and it's affirmed by the wider church. It's affirmed by leadership. It's affirmed by other prophets. If you're a prophet, I just get uncomfortable when I see, Apostle Sarah on Instagram with 5 followers, and who's just putting out wacky stuff out there. And so I think that puts a lot of people off because it's just abuse sometimes. It's people's just trying to get a platform, trying to draw attention, trying to make money, whatever that is. And so I get that. A prophet is someone who over time has shown that they have a level of accuracy and trust and character that has been affirmed by others in leadership above them.
Yes.
And so I think I would say that there's a level of frequency. So they share what God is saying often, and there's a level of accuracy. In other words, what they say comes to pass. If every time, I mean, people call themselves prophets, but I look back over the last 5 years and not one thing they've ever shared has actually happened. And so there's got to be some level of accountability there. And when I am sharing things with people, I will say, this, I believe the Lord is saying this. I believe this is, for you, but I want you to test it. I want to see, does it resonate with you, what the Lord is saying to you? And I want you to come back to me at some stage in the future and tell me, did the Lord fulfill that? Did the Lord, was that word fulfilled? So things started to really click for me maybe almost 10 years ago, actually. It was 2014, 2015. And I began, again, I was always sent, a bit like yourself, I sensed the Lord say this, I was hearing the Lord, for me personally, more than any other situation. And then I began to be brought into situations where I was being asked to give prophetic insight for churches and different organizations. And that's when something shifted. So in 2015, I was brought into one of the biggest churches here in Ireland. And in 2015, I stood up in May 2015 and I said I told a lot of things, but one of them was, you need to upgrade your ability to live stream. You don't need it now, you'll need it in 2020. Now that was in 2015.
Wow.
I said, you need to upgrade your ability to live stream because you'll need it in 2020. I had no idea what that meant.
Sure.
It was only in 2020 that they sent it back to me and said, Craig, you prophesied this to us. As a result of that, we took it seriously and they were positioned.
Right.
So, it could be a simple thing. I was in Australia for a month recently, and about 2 weeks before we were due to come home, the church Hillsong, the pastor, wonderful Lucinda, sent me a DM saying, Craig, I know you're on sabbatical. Would you consider preaching on the Sunday night before you go home? This is now 10 days beforehand, probably, before I'm due to preach. And so I said to somebody, I'm preaching in Hillsong. They said, that must have been arranged months ago. I said, no, it was arranged a few days ago. And they said, how did you? And I said, you know what? 6 weeks ago, if you were to go to my journal, 6, 7, 8 weeks before that, I wrote Hillsong Sunday PM in it. I was just praying to the Lord. I was just asking him about our trip to Australia. And I sensed him say to me, you're going to preach in Hillsong on the Sunday night. So therefore, when Lucinda asked me, I already knew what I was going to say. I didn't have to pray about it. It wasn't a shock. So when I talk about the prophetic advantage, that's what it is. It's giving you a sense, and it's not, listen, we all get it wrong at times. It is giving you a sense ahead of time what the Lord's going to do, what's going to happen, even what's going to happen in the world, or whatever, what's going to happen in your business. It is giving you a prophetic discernment about somebody. Maybe you're thinking of hiring somebody, and on paper they look perfect, but there's just this something within you that says, check them out a bit more. That's a prophetic discernment. That's a prophetic, and you check them out and you realize they've just left a trail of destruction everywhere they've went.
Yeah.
You are dating somebody, and again, they just look like, on paper they look perfect, but there's just something, and so you do a little bit more digging, and you discover that they've left a trail of broken hearts around the place. It could be as simple as that.
Listen, the fall is crazy. And I know that sometimes you're so busy, it's hard to eat the way you'd like to. That's where Factor comes in. Their chefs do the shopping and the chopping to bring you fresh, never frozen, fully cooked meals right to your doorstep. All you have to do is heat and eat. All of their meals are dietitian approved, so you know that you're getting the nutrition you need along with the fall flavors that you crave. There's no prep and no mess, just delicious meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon delivered right to your door. And y'all, they're ready in just 2 minutes. And the great news is the Christy Wright channel listeners get a discount. Go to factormeals.com/CWC50. And when you use the code CWC50, you get 50% off your first box and 20% off your next month. So head over to factormeals.com/CWC50 today.
One of the keys when we're thinking about the prophetic, one of the things that really helped me was this. When God speaks, it will sound like your thoughts, but it's a thought you wouldn't normally have had.
Yes.
I think this is key. This changed it for me. It's a thought that comes because people expect an external booming voice like "Go to the Super Bowl," where it's not. It's a thought. This thought comes into your head, and you go to where did that come from? Why? We've all had that thing where we've thought about somebody and we haven't seen them in 3 years, and we send them a text message. And they say, "Thank you." Like, you have no idea how much I needed that right now.
That's right.
We've all had that. That's the Holy Spirit. We just don't. It's so normal we don't recognize it as that, but we've all had that happen.
And we say things like, "Oh, we had a God moment," or a God wink, or this was a divine appointment. We'll talk around prophecy, but I love how you just normalize it. You just say, "This is what prophecy is. It's when you're hearing from God, and it can come in different forms, like we'll talk about in a second." But I love, first of all, I want to go back to something you said a second ago because I kind of love that you get hung up on the word prophet too, because I do too. So I'm like, "Oh, good. Like I'm not, I'm not
I
alone."
struggle with.
But when you say frequency and accuracy, the other thing that I think is fascinating is so often we operate within the constraints of the earth, the natural, and time. And God doesn't operate inside of time. So, like, it's so interesting because even, if you prophesy something and it doesn't come to pass necessarily in the time frame that you think or I think or someone else thinks, it doesn't even necessarily mean that was wrong because it may come to pass some other time. Like I think of Lisa Bevere. She's a Bible teacher and a friend of mine, and she said that she talked to this man. It was a pastor in 1980s, in the 1980s, and he said, "I see a vision of a future where everyone on the planet is walking around with a box in their hand."
I've heard that prophecy. It was the late Bob Jones, I think it
Bob
was.
Jones,
And
okay.
he saw people in the Far East, and I think he described it as like the paddy fields of Vietnam or somewhere, and they had they were holding little televisions almost. He's
Yes.
described it as, yeah.
And you're going, that was in the 80s, right? So you'd be like, he's crazy. Why would everyone walk around with boxes or whatever? And decades later, that comes to pass. And what's so interesting is I think, and I want to dig into this. I think one of the things that's so challenging about prophecy, especially when you're talking about you get a word, sometimes we get a word for ourselves. We might get a word to share globally for the church. We might get a word for a specific person. The example you just shared, the example you just shared of you text a person, that was prophetic even in you saying that. So I just want to tell a
Yeah.
story so my listeners know, like, even what you just said. I had written down here in the margins to bring up this example in our conversation several months ago, maybe 6 months ago. I woke up when my alarm went off, and this would have been like 5:36 in the morning. And the thought was, text so and so. It was a specific friend of mine that I had not seen in 3 years. The example you just said, 3 years, had not seen her in 3 years, and tell her this was the thought. Tell her that she is pregnant.
Wow.
Okay, the risk of that, Craig. Can we?
Hugely risky.
I am a nervous wreck because this person I had not talked to in 3 years. I knew her story. Her story was of praying to be pregnant, of trying to be pregnant, of infertility. Like it was a long history, and and I did not know where they were present day because I haven't talked to her in 3 years. I wake up on this morning and I have this thought: text this person and tell her that she's pregnant. Well, I got to confess, Craig, I didn't have the nerve. I didn't have the nerve to say it that way. So I drafted a text. I was like, "Is this still your number?" I actually had to ask a friend what her phone number was because I didn't even have it. I get the phone number and I said, "Hey, this is Christy Wright. I know we haven't talked in a long time. I know this is out of thin air. I'm so sorry if this is weird. And I just want you to know I'm very nervous right now at texting you this, because I realize that what I'm about to say has a lot of weight, potential heartbreak to it, and feelings attached to it, and risk attached to it. But I just feel the Lord telling me that you're supposed to take a pregnancy test. And so that was my way around it, Craig. I didn't say you are pregnant, but I was like, lead you in the right direction. Like, go
And
take
I think that's okay. I think that was why. I think I was wise.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a nervous wreck, right? A nervous wreck. But I had learned by this point to discern prophecy. And I knew that thought was not for me.
Yeah, that was not a normal thought for you to wake up with.
Nope. No, there was no other explanation other than that there was a reason that God wanted to text this girl. So she texts me back. I'm bawling. I am pregnant. No one knows. Today's our first ultrasound. And this was the time at which last pregnancy we lost the baby, that there was no heartbeat. And so she goes into, that morning that she's a nervous wreck, she gets a text from a person she hasn't heard from in 3 years that says, take a pregnancy test. Well, when she tells me that, I finally go, actually, he told me to tell you you're pregnant, which is obviously heartbeat. Like, I've got chills even as I think about it. The Lord wanted to encourage her, but it took me not understanding that thought, the risk of that being on the line of like, she's not pregnant, and then I'm feeling like a terrible person and so on. So I just, even what you just said, oh, it's you wake up and you text a friend you haven't talked to in 3 years, and then they're encouraged by it. Even that, like, I want people to see this happening in real time, how the Spirit moves through our words that are poignant and specific and for a person when you don't even necessarily know what you're saying. So let's talk about that. What about, you have a thought and you don't understand it. Like, people are holding boxes, or I don't understand why I'm supposed to text her this. You don't understand the thought.
And that will happen.
Yep.
So let me give you an example. I was praying for a guy once at the front of a conference. Didn't know who he was. And as I'm praying with this guy, I keep seeing a horse. I'm thinking, is he a jockey? Is he keep horses? What? And I'm praying and I keep seeing this horse. And I said to him, I'm sorry, I keep seeing a horse. Does that mean anything to you? He said, my name is Alan Bridle.
Wow.
And so his last name was Bridle. It was just a way of God saying, I know who you are.
I know you by name.
But there's always this moment, and Christy, you had it there, where you have to go, oh, I'm going to do this. There's always, no matter how long you have been doing this, there's this moment of courage.
Mm-hmm.
My wife would tell you the same. She has had that experience where she will go up to somebody and she will say, I sensed it, and the person will just look blankly at them and she'll go, I'm never doing that again. And then a month later, the person texts them and goes, by the way, everything you said that day was spot on. And she's like, why didn't your face tell us that a month ago? Like, because for the last month, I've been thinking I totally missed it.
Sure.
So here's the thing. I've come to the conclusion that I am just the mailman. I'm just the postman.
You're the messenger.
My job is not to try to decipher it all. My job is to deliver what the Lord gives me to give. And so and you will get blank looks. You will get all sorts of reactions. You will get hugs. You will get tears. You will get all sorts of things. The reaction should not, it's lovely when they cry. It's lovely when they hug you. All of that's lovely. But my job is not to determine the outcome. My job is to share what the Lord gives me. But it is always this moment of, I've got to do this. I don't want to do this. But something happened. It was probably around that time, 2014, 2015, when I was really growing in this. I was the guest speaker in another church. It was a large church. It was the head of the denomination's church in Ireland. And first service, I'm preaching. And as I get up to preach, there's a couple right at the back. It was the early service, there was maybe 300-400 people in the room. There's a couple at the back. And I hear the Lord say, tell them it wasn't their fault. That they did their best. They gave their all. Tell them it wasn't their fault. And I chickened out. I didn't do it. Because I had never been in this church before. I didn't know what they felt about prophecy. I didn't know who this couple was. I was focused. I chickened. I just decided not to do it. And after the service, I said to the pastor, there was a couple sitting at the back. Tell me, who are they? He said, oh, Craig, they've just come back from the mission field. They'd sold everything. You thought they'd heard God. And when they went out there, it was a total disaster. It all fell apart, and they're home and they're blaming themselves. And I went, I can't believe I didn't tell them it wasn't their fault. And the Lord, at that moment of, if I could turn back an hour, just turn back time. And I just thought, from this point onwards, I'm going to share it, no matter what. because I never want to get to the stage again where a couple like that leaves the church still feeling it was their fault. And so from now on, no matter how ridiculous, I would rather look stupid and than leave people without hearing the voice of
That's
God.
right. That's right.
That was a turning point for me where I just went, I'm going to look stupid at times, and that's okay. And there's times even in my own church at the start of the year, I'll get up and I'll share what I believe the Lord's saying for the year ahead. And I can tell they're looking at me like I'm some sort of wacko conspiracy nut job. And then at the end of 2019, December 30th, 2019, I sent out a word to my email list. Everybody was talking about 2020 vision, best year for year of double. I set out, it is going to be the most pivotal year. I see riots on the streets of America. I see something happening that's going to shape the next decade. I see the National Guard on the streets of America. I said, and people unsubscribed right, left, and center because it was too negative. And then March 2020 happened. Everybody comes back to me and
Yeah.
goes, we're sorry for unsubscribing.
Right. What else do you have to say about what's coming up? They want to know.
Again, for me, that was another reminder. I just have to share what he gives me.
Yep. Yep.
Sometimes it will be a little word of encouragement for a friend or somebody I haven't seen in a while, and sometimes it will be a much more global national word.
Yeah.
I don't take the credit when it's right, and I try not to take the blame when it doesn't happen in the timeline. And again, you know what? Sometimes we will get it wrong. Sometimes we'll totally miss it. And that's, put your hands up and go, I got it wrong.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that's what's so interesting. I mean, the Bible says we will. We know in part and we prophesy in part. The pressure to be perfect is off. We're all human. We're all flawed. And I love the example of what you shared of sometimes we'll look crazy, sometimes we'll look stupid. I think that every time when I share something, but the thing that I have decided, and I decided this a few years ago, specifically when the Lord kept putting me in these situations, I would rather be wrong because I obeyed than wrong because I didn't. So if I obey and I got it wrong, didn't say it wrong, it was the wrong timing, I discerned it wrong, fine. But at least I obeyed and did what I felt like the Lord had given me to do, even though I didn't understand it. Like you said, there will be times that you get hugs and tears, and there will be times you get blank stares and find out later, and there'll be times that you never understand later. I still hold the trust that it still could have been right, and I just never get to see the fruit of that one. That one doesn't come back around and say thank you or say that was on point, but I know what God said, and I did the best I could with what I discerned in that moment. And so I want people to hear that the pressure is off to be perfect. The call is really just an invitation to partner with people that God has chosen to partner with us. He doesn't have to. He could speak to them on his own if he wants to. He's invited us in community to speak and encourage one another. And what's so beautiful is when we do share those words, like that text to that girl or the countless examples you have or other examples I have, then that person, all they can do at the end of that text or at the end of that conversation is go, praise God. Because there's no other explanation of how you could know horse or how I could know pregnancy test or there's no other explanation other than the God of the universe sees them, recruited a person to invite them to go partner and speak to them in the natural through a natural voice and to encourage them so specifically. And so I love how you talked about courage is required. You may look silly, you may feel silly. There's always going to be a risk that you're wrong or they stare at you, but it's just worth risk because when you get it right and you get a few of these that people are encouraged by them, you want to do it more and more because you go, just like you said with that couple, you're like, I don't want someone else to walk out and I didn't share the word the Lord gave me. So it's just this stewardship. I'm just the messenger. But you said something else I want to go back to because you're saying so many things that are so good that I want to dig into. It's not always positive. It's so the 2020 to the 2019 email.
Yeah.
Right. It's not always like God has blessings for you tomorrow. God favor. It's not always that. Sometimes it's not great news. And so talk a little bit about the courage to share something that is hard, or maybe a correction, or maybe I don't know, something that's just not super easy to hear. Talk about the courage required to share those.
It definitely does take. I mean, there's two words that keep coming up: courage and encourage here. Because the goal is always to encourage, and it always takes courage. And so, when it's a more difficult word, even that has a redemptive element. And I think it's important that we always, even in a difficult word, we look for the redemptive element. This is going to be a hard year. But the Lord is sovereign. As you see the shaking all around you, as you see chaos and confusion, I want you to know the fact that the Lord has shown this ahead of time means that he's not taken by surprise. He hasn't abdicated his throne. The angels aren't going, "Oh, Jesus, what are we going to do now?" And and the Father's looking at Jesus, go, "What are we going to do?" Like, they know. And so when God shares stuff with you ahead of time that is negative, it is one part of it is simply to encourage the saints that this hasn't taken God by surprise, that he rules and reigns in total supremacy and absolute sovereignty, that before 2020 even started, he knew what was coming. It didn't take him by surprise. So there's that one element of that. Secondly, when we do look at the prophets in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, was it Agabus who said, "Paul, I see your hands bound and you're going to be taken," I mean, that wasn't a particularly positive word, and yet it was true. And so there's times when we do share stuff that isn't all that positive. And it's the heart with which you do it. Jesus said to a woman, "You've been married 4 times and the guy you're living with isn't your husband." Like, that's not a positive, but it was redemptive. He was pulling up stuff that she was trying not to talk about. But it was redemptive. It was to demonstrate that God knows all about you, but you're still dearly loved. And so even in those difficult words, it's God. This is, even if there's something going on in your life and the Lord, there's the old illustration. John Wimber, who founded the Vineyard movement of churches, was on a flight once, and he looked across at the businessman sitting across from him, and he saw the word adultery written across the man's head. It was literally as if somebody had taken a marker and written, and he looked away and he looked again, and then he saw a woman's name and the word adultery. And he leans across to the guy and I'm going to call her Mary. Does the name Mary mean anything? And the guy, his face just went.
I've got chills all over my body.
Right. And he said, "Come with me," because the guy's wife was sitting beside him. And they went up to it was the bar at the next level of the plane. And the man said, "Why did you do that?" And John Wimber said, "I saw the word adultery and I saw the name Mary." And the man just broke down and started weeping. And he had been having this affair with a girl from work called Mary. And John just said to him, "Look, the Lord has shown me this because you need to stop this now.
That's right.
And you need to put things right with your wife." And the guy weeps. He comes to Christ. He goes down. He confesses to his wife. Obviously, there was a lot more to it than this, but she weeps, and the two of them commit their lives to Christ.
Wow.
Now, that was a difficult word,
right?
But it was a redemptive word.
That's right. That's right. And there was rescue, redemption,
There's
healing
rescue
through it. But I think often we want to bypass the wound, bypass the pain, bypass the sin, bypass the weakness, whatever it is. And God's like, "Oh no, it's through it." All right, y'all. That's it for this week's episode of Get Your Hopes Up. I love hanging out with you every Monday to help you get to know God, get closer to him, and get your hopes up again. Be sure to share this episode on social media so other people can get their hopes up as well. And then be sure to tune in next week for part 2 with Craig Cooney as we continue to talk about prophecy and hearing God's voice. I'll see you then.